In every project, there's an order of operations. And I believe it's those fine details that really make or break a piece of furniture. So today we're going to zero in on those little things and breathe some life into this hutch. So let's get to work. I'm Timber Biscuit. We left off in the last episode with the upper and lower cabinets completely assembled. So the first thing on the to-do list today was to get the drawer slides installed in the lower cabinet, which you see me doing here. And those go in pretty quickly using an offcut to hold my slides to the right height. And as I work my way from the top down, I just cut down that offcut a little more each time. This way the sides on the left and right side align perfectly. Now on this project, like many others I've done, I'm going to be using undermount slides by Bloom. And that means that I have some pretty strict rules to go by when it comes to building the drawer boxes. So the first thing I needed to do was go ahead and break down my sheet goods. Now I'm using 1/2-inch Baltic birch ply for my drawer boxes because I'm intending to use my hutch in the kitchen, and over time they'll probably take a beating. So once I've ripped my drawer box sides down to their rough width, I could take those pieces over to the table saw and rip them down to their final width. And I've probably gotten dozens of questions as to why I do it this way in the past. And I've always said that I don't feel that my track saw is as accurate as my table saw for small parts. And as much as I'd love to just cut to my final width using the track saw, I really do find my table saw to be a lot more accurate. So while yes, it's an added 5 minutes to the build, I think it's a 5 minutes worth taking. So with all my pieces ripped down, I could go ahead and cut in the groove for the drawer box bottoms. And I find that doing this as one strip really cuts down on the build time. From there I'll go ahead and cut all 8 of my drawer box sides out at 15 inches. And that's because I'm using 15-inch slides, and that's the exact depth the drawer boxes have to be. Again, the rules. So from there I headed over to the drawer slides to get the exact width of my drawer fronts and backs. And because I'll be cutting rabbets on the sides of my drawer boxes, I need to extend that dimension by 1/2 inch. This allows for the drawer boxes to completely conceal the slides when they're in use. You know, out of sight, out of mind. But I'm guessing whoever came up with that saying never had a spider disappear in a lumber rack. So with my discs of death installed at the table saw, I can go ahead and get started cutting in the rabbets. Once I've marked out the width of the rabbet, I just align that mark with the edge of the table saw blade. Then from there I can use a setup block to set the depth and plow rabbets on both sides of the board. Now the main thing to watch out for here is that you don't make your rabbet too wide, which is why I like to use a test piece before I cut my actual work pieces. This ensures that my rabbet ends at the edge of the board and doesn't carry over too far, leaving me with protruding edges. Over at the bandsaw, I can cut in my 1.5-inch long notches into the bottoms of the rear panels of the drawer. These notches are necessary to allow for the slides to wrap around the drawer back. And I find the easiest way to cut these is just to use a magnetic stop so that all my boards are consistent. And if you don't have a bandsaw, I've also gotten really good results just using a pole saw. From there I can head back over to the table saw and cut down my drawer bottoms, which are just going to be made from some 1/4-inch birch ply. And once I have my 4 panels trimmed down, I can move on to the glue up. Now gluing up these drawer boxes isn't overly complicated. Because I have the rabbets, there's a really square shoulder to index against, which means that if I just assemble these drawers as is, they're going to be like 99.9% square. So all I have to do is apply some glue to the rabbets and put the boxes together. From there I'll apply a few clamps to keep everything nice and tight and let these guys dry for about 45 minutes. Next up, it was time to drive in my shelf pin holes. And to do that, I'll just use a shelf pin jig, set it up on both sides of my cabinet, and then use the aligning pins to move the jig up and down. Now admittedly it'd be a little bit easier to do this if the cabinet wasn't already assembled, but doing it with the cabinet assembled also gives you the benefit of ensuring that your shelf pins are going to align perfectly. Because as most woodworkers know, when it comes time to do the glue up, things can shift a little bit. So I guess it's 6 inches to one, 15.24 centimeters to another, or something like that. So the last step is to drive in the holes for the rear pins, and then from there I can attach the hardware. And there's a lot of jigs that you can find online to assist with this process. I'll leave a few links in the description for anyone who's interested. So once both clips are attached to each side of the front, the last really important step is to make sure that your height adjustments are set to the center setting. If you don't do this, you won't be able to make the small adjustments needed for the drawer faces later on. So from there we can slide our drawer boxes in place and then check out that soft close action, which is always a hit. So with the drawer boxes installed, I could turn my focus to the cabinet doors and drawer fronts. And as you'll recall, we glued that panel up in the last episode, meaning this has had a little time to settle in the shop. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the cabinet doors. And with one side trimmed clean, we could cut our doors down to their final width. Now, unlike the drawer boxes, I'm going to go for the final width here because A, it's a larger panel, and B, we want to make sure that we have a continuous grain pattern. Since we're trying to conserve that grain, we don't want to take too much off of the panel. If it ends up that the doors are too wide, I would take material away from the outside edges. This way it doesn't affect the grain in the center. Having a large gap in that grain would look as bad as seltzer water tastes, which I can only assume is the flavor of TV static. Back over at the table saw, I'll trim the doors down to their rough height. Here, I'm aiming for the doors to fit pretty tight, because I want a 1/16 of an inch reveal around the outside, meaning a 1/16 of an inch gap around the top, bottom, and two sides of the doors, or 1.6 millimeter for my international viewers. So the easiest way to do that is to cut the doors to the exact height and then use a hand plane to work my way back to the right fit. Doing this also allows me to really finesse the doors and add a slight taper if I need to one door or the other. Again, I'm just careful here not to remove more material from one door than the other, otherwise I'll have offsetting grain. And with a little blue tape and some shims, things are sitting pretty. The next step was to go ahead and bore out the cups for my hinges. Now, I could set all this up over at the drill press, but I have a really small table on my drill press, so I find that the jigs are just a little bit easier. The only real challenge here is just ensuring that the depth is set correctly. I've used these jigs on numerous occasions and not bottomed out on the depth stop, meaning that the hinge sat a little proud. So when that happens, you have to remove it and then realign everything, and it's kind of a pain. So moral of the story, make sure that you plow deep enough. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but all jokes aside, if you guys are enjoying this video, please give it a like. It allows the video to spread to more people, and I greatly appreciate your support. So with my cups in place, I could go ahead and attach the hinges. And to ensure that those are aligned, I'll just use a combination square. From there, I can go ahead and install the hardware into the cabinet. Now again here, I'm using Bloom soft close hinges. They're just a bit of an older model that I had left over in the shop, but either way, they mount the same as the current version. And maybe even more importantly, function just the same. Nice. So next it was time to cut down the drawer fronts. Now the drawer fronts are a little bit trickier than the cabinet doors, and that's again because I want the drawer fronts to align with those cabinet doors. So I have to make sure that I remove the same amount of material between the drawer fronts so that they align with the grain on the cabinet doors. And since the kerf on the bandsaw is a lot less than it is at the table saw, I opted to go with the bandsaw to rip them down. When it comes down to cutting them down to their final width, however, I will do that over at the table saw. And again here I'm cutting away the outside of my earlier panel so that the inside grain aligns with those cabinet doors. From there I'll again head over to the bench and then just use my hand planes to remove a bit of material and get myself to that 1/16 of an inch reveal. The only tricky part here is deciding which edge to remove the material from. So in this instance I worked from the bottom up. This way when I put the 1/16 of an inch shims in the bottom, it should help align those lower drawer faces and give me a consistent grain pattern across the front. Now, to be completely honest, this isn't fully necessary for this piece because I'm going to be adding a texture to my drawer fronts. And to add a little bit more contrast and interest, I'm also going to slide in a walnut drawer face. And once all is said and done, I really think this is going to make things pop. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you like the contrast, start your comment with contrast. If you like the consistency, start your comment with consistent. And as always, if you start your comment with contrast or consistent, I'll reply to you guys first because I know you're paying attention. Alright, so next it was time to plunge the holes for my drawer pulls. And to do that, I'll just mark both sides evenly and then just use the drill press to plunge those holes. Now, when it comes time to attach these drawer fronts to the drawer boxes here in a minute, these holes will be super important to hold things in place. So using the drill press to make sure everything's set at 90 is a real help. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because like I mentioned earlier, my table at my drill press is pretty small. So when it came time to drill in the holes for the cabinet doors, I had to do those by hand. And the quickest way that I found to do that is just to use a square next to my drill to act as a reference for my drill bit. Holding things at a perfect 90 isn't exactly easy, so the square really helps to guide me in. I guess you could say I'm doing the heavy lifting and it's doing the light lifting. So next up it was time to do the textured drawer fronts. But first I needed to attach my pulls to mark out their location. Then from there I just used some double stick tape to attach the drawer fronts to a sheet of plywood. This will ensure the texture is consistent across all the drawer fronts, and just like the consistent grain pattern, I'll have a consistent texture. Then from there I could lock my router into my jig with a bowl bit and get to work. Now this jig just allows the router to pivot in one place so that it just scoops out a small amount of material from the bottom. And if I do this enough times while keeping it oriented vertically, it'll give me a nice texture across the drawer fronts, much like you'd see in Japanese furniture. Only this is the power tool version. Now in the previous episode I asked if you guys wanted plans for this project, but I'll also make plans for this jig if you guys are interested. Just again, let me know in the comments. Just be forewarned that using it does make a heck of a mess, and it takes a little while. So with the texture all textured, it was time to install those drawer fronts. And to do that, I'll just use my 1/16 of an inch shims to make sure that there's even spacing around all sides of the drawer faces, and then install a couple screws into the drawer pull holes. Now here I'm just careful not to put too much torque on the screws so that I don't indent my drawer face. And here I'm also going to work my way from the bottom up. And I'll leave my shims in place during the entire install. This way the added weight of the drawer faces won't shift all my drawer faces down. So with my drawer faces in place, I'll just pre-drill and then use some screws to attach the drawer boxes to the drawer faces. Then from there I can pop out my temporary mounting screws and plunge my pull holes all the way through the drawer boxes. Next I can attach the hardware for the drawer pull, and our drawer faces are done. And if you're digging these simple approaches to some complex problems, make sure you subscribe. I'll put out new videos about woodworking projects packed with tips and tricks all the time, so subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Ooh, that's nice. So with the lower cabinet near completion, I could get to work on the upper cabinet sliding doors. So to start, I went ahead and made a quick oversized panel. And I made my panel oversized so that I could plane it down to its final dimension after it was all glued up. This gives the panel the best opportunity to stay flat over time. And with the panel thickness down, I could head over to the table saw and rip it down to its final width. Now my plan is to get both sliding doors out of this single panel, again because I want that continuous grain. So while I cut the rabbets on both sides of the doors, I'm just going to leave this as one single panel. And I'll again cut those rabbets just using a dado stack. Now the big thing here is that I want the upper rabbet on the door to be 1/8 of an inch wider than the lower rabbet. And that's because we need that room in order to fit it into our groove we cut in our upper cabinet. So once I have my rabbets cut on all 4 sides, I can go ahead and trim down the doors to their final width. And I'm going to leave the doors with about a 3/4 inch overlap from either side. Since the panels are 1/2 inch thick and the grooves are 3/8 of an inch wide, the doors are going to look really tight against one another when they're inside the grooves. So I'm not too worried about the gaps there, but I really don't want a big offset where the 2 doors meet at the center. To help the doors fit into those grooves, I'm also going to chamfer the backside of the lower rabbet. This just removes a little bit of material and helps those doors pop in just a bit easier. From there I needed to add a little finger pull to make it easy to slide the doors open and shut. And to do that, I'm just going to use my router and a templating bit. I decided to keep things really simple here and just go with a circle, something that's not going to take away from the design, but also something that's a little more subdued. This is also one of the benefits of keeping those doors thicker, because if they were only 3/8 of an inch thick, then this detail wouldn't stand out as much and it wouldn't be as pronounced. Much like a pirate trying to finish the alphabet. It'd be lost at sea. Alright, next it was time to work on the supports that are going to hoist the upper cabinet. Now you may recall that the goal for this support system is to make it removable. And that's because I think it's going to be a pain in the butt to move this thing if the upper and lower cabinets are permanently fixed together. So what I'm doing here is ripping down the parts I need to make the 4 vertical side supports. These are the pieces that are going to sit on either side of the lower cabinet and upper cabinet and hold them together. So with my side supports all ripped down, it took a few minutes to go ahead and plane down the top of the counter. When I was pulling the panel out of clamps, I saw that the center board shifted slightly, so I knew I was going to have to flatten the top. And before I started attaching the vertical supports, I wanted to make sure I had a 90-degree plane to work off of. So after a few minutes of planing, I could check it for flatness, and yeah, she's looking good. From there it was on to the angled supports. So what I first did was make myself 2 templates out of plywood for each of my supports. This way I would A, know the shape, B, their exact width to fit in the notches, and C, where all of my mounting screws were going to go. I much prefer working off a template than my actual workpiece for this type of thing, so I can work out all the fine details on something that's not quite as important. So once I had marked out the shape, I took the pieces over to the bandsaw and rough cut them out. Now here I'm aiming to stay about a 1/16 of an inch outside my line so I don't cut into my workpiece. Then from there I could head over to the router table and use a flush trim bit to flush trim my templates. Now I considered making this part into 2 sections, which is actually how I created the template, but there's just going to be way too much stress on the area to rely on an end grain to end grain joint. Plus parts like this give me an opportunity to match that flowing grain pattern across the entire workpiece, and I think that's a lot more fun than it would be if there was a glue line breaking it up. And I feel like this would be an excellent opportunity to introduce a construction joke, but I'm still working on it. So when I trimmed these pieces out over at the bandsaw, I left them a little long. This way I could trim them down to their final length after I used the router to template them out. Doing this allows for those joints to stay super crisp and avoids me having to route any end grain at all, which is always a plus. Finally, it was time to attach those side supports. Now again here, I'm going to utilize those templates to dictate where all of my holes are going to go. So I first set up all my drilling positions within the template itself, and then made some notes about the size of the bits that I needed to use for each hole. Since I'm using a template, it'll also guide my bit and help keep it at 90 when I'm plunging the mounting holes. Now the plan here is to keep these supports attached to the top cabinet while being able to remove the top cabinet from this lower cabinet. And to accomplish that, I'm just going to cut some adjoining threads into the lower portion of the supports. So the first thing I needed to do was transfer the holes onto my workpieces. And I did that by clamping my template in place and then just nudge the starting hole. From there I'll take the workpiece over to the drill press and finish bottoming out those holes. This again keeps those holes at 90 and ensures they're all the same depth, which just like Roman numerals, I for one am a big fan of. From there I can just use a 1/4-20 wood tap to tap in my threads. The only challenging part here is just making sure that I stop when I hit the bottom of the hole. If you go too far, you'll overcut your threads, and instead of having a threaded hole, you'll just have a big mess. So once you hit the bottom, throw the drill in reverse and back it out slowly. And with the threads in place, I could pop in my bolts and check the fit. Now again here we're going for snug, but not over tight because we don't want to destroy those threads. Then we can collectively breathe a sigh of relief. So with the supports in place, I went ahead and dropped on the upper cabinet. Then from there I can measure the length between the two supports and cut down my two stretchers. Now here again we're going to go for some more contrast, so these stretchers are going to be made from white oak. And once I have them cut down to the final length, I'll just use the domino to plunge in the mortises for the joinery. Now while the back panels are going to do a ton for the strength of this piece, I feel like these stretchers would do a lot to mitigate any potential racking. Plus again, it's an opportunity to add some more contrast to the piece, which I think makes things more visually interesting. So once I had all the joinery cut, I could take my workpieces over to the workbench and plane down the edges. There's nothing more satisfying to me than planing edge grain on straight workpieces. Something about those thin, wispy curls just really hits me in my feels. The only challenging part with white oak is that because it's such an open grain, it tends to tear out. So you have to be extra careful to make sure you're planing with the grain. And if you do so, it sounds like this. Ah, that's just music to my ears. So once I had planed down all of my supports, I could go ahead and finally glue them in place. Now I'm going to speed through this portion of the build because I attached the upper cabinet supports much like I did the lower cabinet supports. Only this time I'm going to use screws and permanently attach them through the inside of the case to the support along with some wood glue. I think the trickiest part here was just figuring out how to actually get to each screw hole. Unfortunately, it's just not that easy to get around. Unlike a tire swing when you were a kid. Yeah, those were the good years. So with the glue up and the reminiscing completed, I could go ahead and cut some plugs. Plugs are a great way to conceal things like screws, and if you play your cards right, you can align the grain pattern so that you can barely tell they're there. So with my plugs all plunged at the drill press, I could take my workpiece over to the bandsaw and cut them out. Just be careful that you don't cut them too shallow. Like that guy. From there I can squeeze a dab of glue into the hole, pop in the plug, and then give it about 30 minutes to cure. When you're tapping in the plugs, don't go too hard with your mallet here, otherwise you risk splitting the plug and that kind of kills the illusion. Another thing I like to do is just mark the grain pattern with a pencil on the top of the plug. This way it just makes things a little easier to align. Once the 30 minutes was up, I could come back with my flush trim saw, trim off the end of the plug, then clean it up with a 180 grit sanding block. Next it was time to finish up the countertop, and the first thing I did was add a light chamfer around the entire top edge. This is less to lighten the look like an underbevel would, and more just to break that really hard edge. From there I'll hit all the edges again with a 180 sanding block, just to make sure again that we're breaking all those edges. So once I addressed all the rough edges, I could address the rough-ish top. And to do that, I'm going to hit the entire top with a card scraper. If there's places where I know people are going to touch, like a countertop, I love hitting them with a card scraper because it makes those surfaces ultra smooth. And with a super slick top, I can move on to building the base. So the first thing I need to do is mark out my cuts for my front, back, and two side stretchers. From there I can head over to the table saw and cut them all down to their final length. Now my side and back stretchers are going to be 2 inches wide, but my front stretcher is going to be 3. And that's because the front stretcher will get a more decorative treatment that will mimic the angles from the upper cabinet. So with my stretchers all cut down, I could get to work on the feet. Now the material I'm using for the feet is actually a spare table leg that I made from the dining table build. which allows me to make the feet 2 inches by 2 inches without having to glue up any new boards. I'll just be sure to put that laminated side to the back of the case, and no one's ever going to see it. Yep, nothing screams woodworker quite like a part that's brand used again. Next, it was time to cut the tapers. So I first marked out all the tapers on a single workpiece, and then set it to the side while I set up the saw, because I'm going to be cutting along the grain when I cut the tapers. Now, I don't have a dedicated jig for cutting tapers. I much prefer building a sled for each taper. This way I can kind of customize the sled for the size of the taper. So the first thing I need to do is cut down a panel of scrap ply to make the sled. And I won't touch the fence again until I'm done cutting all my tapers. And then from there I'll align my workpiece on my sled, then screw in a couple reference blocks to keep things aligned, and a hold down clamp. From there I just need to make sure that my workpiece is oriented in the correct direction, and then I can make the cuts. After the first pass, all I have to do is rotate the piece once and make the second cut. Now I can lay out and cut out those decorative angles on the front stretcher like we talked about earlier. So I first grab the angle off the face of the cabinet and then use a bevel gauge to transfer it onto my workpiece. From there I mark the remainder of the workpiece at 2 inches so that there's a consistent size as the stretchers wrap around the cabinet. To trim those angles out, I'll just use the bandsaw. Now here I'm careful to stay just outside my line so that I can plane back to my final dimension later on. And once I have those angles cut, I'll just use the fence to guide my workpiece and keep that line nice and straight. The main thing to watch out for here is that I don't cut into those angles. So towards the end of the cut, I just take things really slow. From there it was time for the joinery, and again here I'm going to turn to the domino. I love using a domino for base joinery. And once a domino becomes part of your workflow, this type of setup goes really quickly. So all I have to do is plunge my mortises at 20 millimeters for my stretcher parts, and then drop the fence to 30 millimeters and plunge the mortises in my feet. This will give me a slight offset between the stretcher and the feet and add a bit of depth to the base. From there, I can plunge the mortise for the center stretcher and then get on to cleaning these boards up. So you probably noticed in these projects, I start my work with power tools and then work my way down to hand tools. And for me, that's the best way that I can approach most of these pieces. I let the power tools do the heavy lifting and the hand tools do the fine finishing. Or as I said earlier, the light lifting. In any case, it really works for me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't think that you have to be a one-dimensional woodworker. There's a happy medium between the two, and I promise it's a good time. So with my hand tools and my soapbox put away, I could get on to the glue up. Now the glue up for this is pretty straightforward. Again, I'm going to use some pipe clamps and some parallel clamps to hold everything in place. And thankfully everything was square. But if you're gluing up something similar and it isn't square, you can just throw one more clamp at an angle across the piece and squeeze it into square. From there it was time to cut out the rear panels. Now as I stated a few times, the rear panels are really important for the structure of this piece. So I want to cut these panels as large as I can get them, so they're as tight as I can get them to prevent racking. Honestly, they're the silent heroes of this piece, just like the G in lasagna. So with the rear panels all trimmed out, I could get on to the finish. And for the finish on this piece, I'm going to be using a hard wax oil. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, because I'm using an oil, this process took like 6 or 7 hours. So just keep that in mind if you ever decide to use wipe-on oil on a piece the size of this. I really love the way this finish looks, so it was worth it for me, but it may not be for everyone. For most cabinets, a conversion varnish will work great, but again, I love the look of an oil. So while I finish up the finish, let me take a quick moment to say that if you guys are enjoying the videos you see on the channel and you want to support the show, I'd like to invite you to join my Patreon. There's a lot of fun perks to becoming a member, including discounted project plans, along with monthly plan giveaways, an invitation to the live chats, behind the scenes access, and a whole lot more. Plus, your donations go 100% towards making these videos. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, check out the link in the description. And to all my current members, thank you for your continued support. I really appreciate each and every one of you. So with the finish curing and the brand in place, I could go ahead and move on to the assembly. And the first thing I needed to do was pop in the sliding doors, which with the rear panel removed, went in pretty easily. Once the rear panel's in place, it'll probably be a bit more challenging to get these in and out, but luckily I really only have to do this once unless something catastrophic happens. Next it was time to get the base attached to the lower cabinet. And to attach the base to the lower cabinet, I'm going to be using figure 8 fasteners. So what I first do is use a Forstner bit to remove enough material so that the fastener sits flush with the top of the base. Then a chisel to remove the bit of material needed to squeeze in that figure 8 fastener. Then from there I'll just use a self-centering drill bit to drill in a pilot hole. And next all I have to do is drive in the screws. From there I'll flip the entire cabinet upside down and attach the base from the top. Again pre-drilling and then driving in the screws. From there it was time to attach the rear panels, which were a really nice snug fit. And to tack them in place, I'm just going to use some 23 gauge brad nails. and I decided not to glue the panels in place just in case I ever need to remove them in the future. From there, it was time to move this beast into position. And I really shouldn't say beast because moving the two sections was actually pretty easy. So to attach the upper cabinet to the lower cabinet, again, I'm just going to use those bolts, but I also used a bit of hide glue to give it a little more security, and when I need to move it in the future, I can just wet the glue and remove the top. So hey, let's check out those glamour shots. If I'm being honest, this is probably one of the most challenging builds I've ever done. At every step, I was pushed a little further and a little further as a craftsman, but I think the end result speaks for itself. Overall, this is a pretty reserved design, but I think that's what really makes this piece stand out. It's not too over the top, and I would even argue that it's relatively simple. But when you start diving into all the details, you start to understand how understated this piece truly is, because man, it's got a lot going on. From those textured drawer fronts, to the angled upper cabinet with sliding doors, the base that reflects those angles, and of course the continuous grain across the front. Plus, let's not forget about the utilitarian side. This piece also provides a ton of storage, and the fact that it can be moved easily is a huge bonus. So if you enjoyed this project and you want to see more like it, check out this video over here next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and as always, I knew this would work, and I'll see you next time.